Tony Scott's house has long been the subject of whispers, not only because of his tragic death in 2012, but because of the atmosphere left behind in the property. The director, known for Top Gun and True Romance, spent his last years in a home that many described as both inspiring and strangely oppressive, a place filled with memorabilia, storyboards, film reels, and endless reminders of a man who lived entirely through his work. When the property finally changed hands, it was bought by a young couple from Los Angeles, Daniel and Melissa. They weren't Hollywood insiders. Daniel was a tech consultant, Melissa a photographer. They were drawn to the house not by its history, but by the views, the broad windows looking out across the Los Angeles basin, the dramatic drop of the canyon below, and the sheer cinematic scope of the place. To them, it was a dream home, though they admitted the real estate agent's repeated warnings about quirks in the property felt odd at the time. From the beginning, life in the house seemed unsettled. Melissa would find her camera batteries inexplicably drained when she tried to shoot inside. Daniel, working late in his home office, often felt the sharp sensation of someone standing just behind him. Neighbors, when they learned the couple had moved in, offered awkward congratulations but shared knowing looks, as if they expected the new owners wouldn't last long. At night, the house took on an even stranger quality. The couple reported hearing faint sounds like editing machines, the whir of film reels, and sometimes muffled voices never distinct enough to understand, but always there, woven into the silence. Melissa once described walking into the living room just past midnight and finding the curtains shifting, though no window was open. She swore she caught the faint smell of cigarette smoke, even though neither of them smoked. Most unsettling were the shadows. The home's layout: long corridors, split levels, high ceilings meant that light often played tricks. Yet Daniel insisted more than once that he saw the shape of a man standing by the glass doors leading to the balcony. When he flicked on the light, the space was empty, though the glass carried a vague imprint, like condensation where someone might have been breathing moments before. The couple tried to rationalize it, blaming stress, the house's acoustics, even their own imaginations. But each passing month deepened their unease. They had bought the home for its sweeping views, yet both found themselves keeping the blinds closed at night, unwilling to stare too long into the canyon darkness. Daniel and Melissa tried to live normally inside the house, but the longer they stayed, the more the place seemed to resist their efforts. It wasn't immediate, not like the shock of a sudden storm, but rather a slow, steady shift and almost invisible erosion of their comfort. First, it was little things. Melissa would set her photography equipment by the sliding doors in the living room, intending to catch the sunset spilling across the city, only to return and find her tripod slightly moved, angled away from the light as if someone had touched it. Daniel, buried in late-night work, noticed his laptop screen flickering when the rest of the house's power seemed fine. The strangest thing, though, was the atmosphere. Visitors noticed it immediately. Friends who came over for dinner often remarked how heavy the house felt, though no one could quite describe why. It wasn't the design. Everyone agreed the house was beautiful, filled with space and air and cinematic views. But once night fell, conversations would grow strained, laughter subdued, as though the walls themselves pressed closer. People excused themselves early, promising to come back, though few ever did. Melissa, more sensitive to these moods, became uneasy in her own home. She worked on photo projects in the upstairs studio, a room with massive windows that overlooked the canyon. But during editing sessions, she often caught herself glancing at the reflection in the glass, convinced she had seen someone standing behind her. First, she thought it was Daniel. Then, when she called out, no one answered. When she checked, the house was quiet except for the faint hum of appliances. Daniel dismissed much of it at first, leaning on logic, blaming stress from work. But one evening, while pacing the hallway that stretched toward the master bedroom, he stopped mid-step. At the end of the hall was a faint glow, as if someone had left a television on in a room that shouldn't have had one. He walked closer, but the light dissolved as he neared. Opening the door, he found only the guest bedroom, empty and cold. The house had an undeniable connection to its former owner. That much became clear when they uncovered boxes left behind in the garage. The realtor had told them the place had been cleared, but Melissa discovered containers pushed against the far wall, half hidden beneath dust sheets. Inside were items that didn't belong to the couple: old storyboards, scripts with handwritten notes in the margins, and reels of film labeled with dates and titles, some they recognized, others not. Daniel wanted to throw them away, but Melissa insisted on keeping them, believing they carried historical value. Yet, from the day those boxes were disturbed, the atmosphere in the house deepened into something heavier, harder to ignore. At night, Melissa began waking to sounds: soft footsteps across the hardwood floor, too deliberate to be the house settling. Daniel tried to comfort her, saying maybe she dreamed it. But when he finally woke one night to hear the unmistakable creak of the upstairs landing, followed by silence, he could no longer explain it away. He searched the house thoroughly, every room, every lock, every window secure. Still, the footsteps had been real, and they had both heard them. The strangest detail came in the form of voices. Not full conversations, never loud, but whispers that seemed to leak through the walls. They weren't like neighbors through thin partitions. This was different, closer, as though the sound originated inside the very structure of the home. Sometimes it was just one voice, deep and low, at other times two, exchanging brief, incomprehensible words. Melissa swore that once she heard her own name spoken, faint but distinct, while she stood in the kitchen alone. Neither Daniel nor Melissa wanted to admit it aloud, but both sensed the same presence in the house. It wasn't violent, not in the way one might imagine. It was more like the lingering energy of a man who had filled every room with his work, his passions, and his demons, as though the house itself had absorbed his restless intensity and could never quite release it. And as the weeks turned to months, the new owners found themselves strangely caught between fear and fascination. They didn't want to leave, but they could no longer pretend the house was just a house. It had become something else, something alive with echoes of the man who once called it home. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Melissa's photography slowly began to shift. Before moving into the house, her work had been marked by warmth, sunlit portraits, playful shadows, vibrant color. But since living there, her photos carried a different mood. She noticed it first when reviewing her digital files. Images shot in daylight appeared oddly muted, as if the lens had absorbed a gray veil. Faces she captured seemed distant, detached, their eyes hollowed by shadow even when the light had been good. One afternoon, she set up her camera in the living room, hoping to capture the city skyline through the glass. Reviewing the photos later, she froze. In one frame, barely visible in the reflection of the window, stood the shape of a man. Not sharply defined, just a blurred silhouette, shoulders squared, head bowed slightly forward. She zoomed in, trying to dismiss it as a trick of light, but the outline had proportion, presence, weight. Daniel told her it was probably her own reflection distorted by the angle, but Melissa insisted the figure was taller, broader, not her at all. Daniel, meanwhile, began having trouble sleeping. The master bedroom, which had first felt expansive and filled with air, now carried a strange restlessness. Nights stretched long and unsettled, with Daniel waking in short bursts, sweating. His dreams vivid yet slipping from memory the moment he opened his eyes. He described them only as scenes, flashes of hallways, doorways, and someone watching from the other side of glass. Sometimes, lying awake, he heard faint tapping, like a finger brushing rhythmically against the window. The couple began avoiding certain rooms after dark. The guest bedroom at the end of the hall became one of them. Neither could explain why. They just felt an unease when walking past its door, as though something waited inside. Melissa stopped using the upstairs studio altogether, preferring to edit her work at the dining table downstairs, where she could at least feel grounded by the kitchen light. Daniel joked about selling the house once or twice, but his tone never carried humor. The neighbors, curious but cautious, revealed little pieces of the home's past in fragmented conversations. One older woman across the street admitted she had seen lights flickering in the house long after it was empty, before Daniel and Melissa moved in. "Always the upstairs windows," she said, lowering her voice, like someone was pacing at night. Another neighbor recalled seeing moving trucks arrive, only to return half full. "They never cleared the whole place," he said. "It was as if nobody wanted to handle what was left behind." The house had a strange effect on sound. Melissa noticed it when she was alone. A faint echo, like voices being carried in from a distance. Though there was no music playing, no television, no conversation outside. Sometimes, standing in the hallway, she could hear faint clapping as though from a film set, an audience, or perhaps just the memory of a man applauding his own work. The couple began marking their experiences in subtle ways. Daniel started keeping the blinds closed in the evenings, no longer wanting the glassy expanse of windows to reflect their movements back at them. Melissa kept her camera packed away, too unsettled by what she might capture unintentionally. They avoided speaking directly about what they felt, as if words might give the presence in the house greater strength. And yet, despite their unease, neither of them could pull away from the place. The view at dusk was still extraordinary, the horizon glowing orange, the city glittering beneath them. The house had beauty, undeniable and intoxicating, and every time they thought about leaving, they found themselves justifying another week, another month. It was as though the property held them tightly in its grip, whispering promises they couldn't fully hear, reminding them that they had chosen it for a reason. The room that slowly began to draw their attention was the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. From the start, both Daniel and Melissa had felt something unusual about it, though neither admitted it aloud in those first months. It was the last door on the upper floor, tucked away past a narrow stretch of hallway where the light from the ceiling fixture never seemed to reach fully. Even when the bulbs were new, that section of the corridor remained dim, as if the house itself swallowed brightness there. The room was simple, just a bed left behind by the previous owner, a small dresser, and a single window facing the canyon. Yet it carried a stillness that pressed down like a weight. The air inside was cooler than the rest of the house, and it often smelled faintly metallic, like rain on iron. Melissa noticed this the first time she entered to clean. Daniel confirmed it months later when he went in to open the blinds. Both tried to rationalize it: old pipes, poor ventilation, something with the insulation, but no explanation held up. The guest room became a space they avoided without ever deciding to. Whenever friends came over, they kept its door shut, steering conversations toward the main living areas. Melissa admitted to Daniel that sometimes, passing by, she felt the urge to open the door quickly, as if someone inside might be waiting for her. Daniel, practical as he tried to be, confessed that when he worked late at night, he could hear faint sounds from behind that door, like a chair scraping gently across the floor, or a long, slow exhale. The tension around the room deepened when Melissa tried to photograph it. One weekend, determined to reclaim the house from their unease, she set up her camera and tripod, telling herself she would make the room part of her project, turn discomfort into art. She framed the shot carefully: the bed, the dresser, the window open to the canyon view. But when she reviewed the images, the corners of the room seemed darker than they had in reality. The shadows reached further, almost crawling toward the bed frame. In one photograph, a streak of light appeared, angled sharply across the floor. It was the shape of a man's arm, though distorted, blurred, as if caught mid-motion. She deleted the file immediately, but it left her shaken. Daniel, though skeptical of his own senses, could not deny what happened one night while he was alone in the house. Melissa had gone to visit her sister, leaving him with a quiet evening. Around midnight, walking down the hall, he noticed the guest room door slightly ajar. He was certain he had closed it earlier. As he approached, the air grew colder. When he nudged the door open with the back of his hand, he felt resistance, not from the hinges, but as though someone on the other side were pressing gently against it. He stepped inside, finding only silence, but the bedsheets bore a visible crease, as though someone had sat there moments before. The room became the heart of their unease, though neither fully acknowledged it. They kept the door shut, but shutting it did not erase the sense that it watched them in return. Sometimes Melissa, standing at the kitchen sink below, swore she saw movement in the upstairs window, the faint suggestion of a figure shifting behind the glass. Daniel, seated at his desk, often felt drawn to glance toward that end of the hallway, always expecting to see the door open again. Neighbors had their own stories. A man down the street, who had once worked in film production, recalled being inside the house years earlier, attending a gathering. "That room was always different," he told Daniel one afternoon, lowering his voice. "Even when Tony was alive, people didn't linger there. He kept the door closed most of the time. Said it was where he went when he needed to think." The neighbor shrugged, unwilling to elaborate, but the implication hung in the air. As weeks stretched on, the house seemed to draw their focus more and more toward that single space. The rest of the property, though grand, began to fade into the background, as though the house itself wanted them to concentrate on the guest room. And every time they passed it, they could not shake the feeling that something waited within, patient and unresolved, its presence rooted as firmly as the foundation beneath their feet. The guest bedroom's presence grew stronger with each passing month, until it was no longer simply a room they avoided, but a center of gravity that pulled on every part of their lives. The door, though kept shut, seemed to resist being ignored. Melissa often swore she heard it creak softly at night, as if it opened just wide enough for something inside to look out. Daniel stopped walking down the hall entirely after dark, preferring to sleep on the downstairs couch when insomnia struck, though he never admitted aloud what kept him from the upper floor. The couple began arguing in small, restless ways. Melissa accused Daniel of dismissing her fears, while Daniel accused Melissa of feeding them with her photographs and her silence. Yet beneath their words lay the same truth. Neither could deny the weight of that room, nor the growing sense that they were intruding on something that had never left. One night, during a storm that rolled in from the Pacific, Melissa woke to a faint rhythmic tapping. Came from upstairs, steady as a metronome. She shook Daniel awake, and together they stood at the base of the staircase, listening. The sound echoed down from the guest room. Tap, pause, tap, pause, as though someone were knocking with the flat of their knuckles against the window pane. Summoning a fragile courage, Daniel climbed the stairs, Melissa following close behind. The air grew colder with each step, until their breath clouded faintly in the dim light. When they reached the room, the door stood slightly ajar. Inside, the window was shut tight, yet condensation streaked the glass from the inside, as though a figure had leaned close, breathing slowly against it. The bed was unmade, sheets drawn down, and for the first time, they both saw it. The faint outline of a man's silhouette seated at the edge of the mattress, head bowed, broad shoulders sloping forward. Not solid, not sharp, but enough that the mind recognized presence before the eye could explain. Melissa gasped. Daniel pulled her back, and in that instant the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving only the metallic tang in the air and the silence of a house that seemed suddenly too alive. From that night on, the house was no longer theirs in spirit. They still lived within its walls, but every sound carried suggestion. Every reflection hinted at more than one occupant. Melissa abandoned her photography altogether, unable to trust what her camera would reveal. Daniel grew restless and withdrawn, often staring toward the canyon with a hollow expression, as though listening to something just out of earshot. Friends stopped visiting, invitations to dinner declined without explanation, neighbors avoiding conversation at the mailbox. They tried once to sell the house. A realtor came, walking through with polite enthusiasm, but by the time she reached the upstairs hall, her tone faltered. She excused herself quickly, saying she would be in touch, but she never returned their calls. 2 more agents came, both leaving with the same vague excuses about the market and difficult buyers. It was as if the house itself refused to let go, binding them more tightly with every failed attempt to escape. In the end, Daniel and Melissa accepted the truth in silence. They no longer spoke of the guest room, no longer argued about the strange occurrences. Instead, they moved quietly around each other, coexisting with the house and whatever remained inside it. The blinds stayed drawn, the door to the guest room closed but never locked, as though they understood that locking it would be pointless. At night, the faint hum of unseen machines drifted through the halls, the echo of film reels, the murmur of voices, the clapping of hands that belonged to no audience present. Visitors to the neighborhood say the house still glows at odd hours, light shifting from window to window as though someone were pacing, thinking, creating. Neighbors claim to hear the faint sound of music or the rustle of a script carried on the wind. And for Daniel and Melissa, who remain there still, life continues in the shadow of that presence, an unfinished story, echoing through walls and corridors, reminding them with each passing day that a part of Tony Scott never left and never will. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.